Hello humans, welcome to Game Development Operations from start to finish. Today we're going to be talking about version control and what version control is, why do you need it, and how does it work. Before we begin, I'd like to say that we're going to be working with Perforce, so if you want to work with something else, go find some other video. Alright, let's get into it. Now, I think it's best if we actually illustrate this, so let's open up Explorer. Wait, no, this is too many. These are too many tabs. So we're going to go to Draw IO, and obviously we're going to decide later again, and this time we're going to use this to show you how exactly and why would you need source control, or also known as version control. Okay, now first and foremost, let me ask you this scenario. So you're working on a file and you want your friend to have access to the file. So what are you going to do? Let's say you're working on a map in a game of yours. Well, obviously the most logical choice would be to send them over the file. So let's say we have two people working on something. That's not nice. Two people working on something. Okay. All right, so you've got Predator and Alien, and they're both working on a level. Now the Predator has created the level and he wants the Alien to have the exact same level so he can make modifications to it and have the most recent version. So you're gonna send him the file and things are gonna be fine and dandy, but then so if he makes some changes, then he's gonna have to send it back to you, right? So you've got constant communication between each other. Every time you need to sync files, right, you gotta send it, see which version is the most recent one, and then let's say at some point both of you guys, so this is the same, this is the level, I'd say this is the level that you're working on. So this is the file that gets bounced around all the time, right? In general, what would happen is this file would usually be easy enough to manage, but once you got thousands of these or hundreds or even 10 files, suddenly things become a little bit more different, because if the Alien and the Predator both have a different version of the file, right? Maybe here a Predator added a bench, and here the alien added a table to a house on the level. What's going to happen once you send him the file? Now he's going to have to re-add his bench, and you're going to have to re-add your table, like one of the other, because you can't actually merge these together. And in all fairness, it's very hard to merge binary files like this anyway. On the other hand, if you'd be working on a system, let's say damage. So, and this is more of a programming system. Now, you can basically write, it's basically code, right? So you could always just diff against each other and say, well, listen, I got this function, you got this function, I'm going to copy your text into my text, and then I'm going to send you the right version, right? But this is becoming very cumbersome, as you might imagine. Not only that, it has has absolutely no security. Someone could pretend to be the alien, or you could hire, maybe let's say you're hiring, let's say you'd be hiring some outside party to work on your project just because you need an artist. For example, let's say Darth Vader is coming in here, and you want him to create some statues or something for your level. And you're gonna have to send him the whole level, basically, which is a big security risk, because the bigger the project, the bigger the chance to leak something. Let's say you're trying to keep your game a secret, and he can always easily just upload some pictures or some screenshots and whatnot. Now, obviously, not everyone will do it, but it's always better to have a security layer around this so that not everyone can access the asset. Okay, another problem here is if something goes wrong with either of these. Now, obviously, Predator and Alien, they both have autosaves and they both have backups, but they have backups of different versions. So, it's very hard to, if something happens to this level, it gets corrupted, it's very hard to actually figure out which one is the most recent version, and obviously you're going to have to exchange it. Now, for two people, this seems viable and possible, so you probably could have something like Dropbox in the middle here, right? You could have, let's say this is Dropbox. Where's the thing? There we go. So this is Dropbox. Or any other cloud storage service, really, like Google Cloud or whatever. So you might say, well, listen, I'm going to have the level, right? We're going to keep uploading the level here. into the Dropbox, and then both of us will just download it, right? So both Alien and Predator, they're gonna both have access to the same Dropbox. You're gonna be both working on the same project, and therefore they'll both be uploading and downloading files from Dropbox. However, this also is a problem because you have direct access to Dropbox. Both of you guys can do something weird. Darth Vader could come in and maybe ruin the party with his, delete something that you don't want. Maybe, he's not happy with you. So he's the variable here. Now, in terms of security, this is not a good design, as you might imagine. And also, don't forget that you can have a bigger team, right? Not only Predator and Alien, but later down the line, you could have some, C-3PO, you could have Kratos, you could have, like a bunch of different people, all of them who have different agendas, and maybe we're working on different files, and then you have to, synchronize everything between all of these people, and, Dropbox is going to get wrecked at that point. So this is a no-go, right? So the solution is very simple. Well, it's not quite that simple, but it's simple enough. So you're going to delete all of these things here. So access to the server, it won't be allowed. Now, we're going to call this the server because that's exactly what it is. And the server is essentially a file structure, a hierarchy, right? Imagine a couple of folders, and in these folders you always have the old versions of the file. So this level would have version 1.0, and then obviously you're going to have version 1.1, and then you're going to have version 1.2, right? So these are all versions of the exact same file, right? This is all the level, okay? So in general, it's best to have backups even of your fuck-ups, okay? So because sometimes you might want to, check something out. So in general, these are your versions. And obviously, Dropbox wouldn't hold it, but the server would. So you're going to have a folder and saying version 1.0, version 1.2, version 1.3, etc., etc., etc. So how does this work? How do a lot of people work on the same project consistently? Well, it's very simple. You have the Predator and the Alien request something from the server. So the Predator is going to request a file, like in a library, right? You go into the library, ask them for a book. So the Predator is going to say, listen, I need access to the level. Okay, the level, we can delete this over here. So the level will be versioned. And the server is going to have all the infrastructure in it and the hierarchy. And he's going to tell you, all right, listen, man, you want access to it? Well, here you go. There's the green arrow. Do what you want. Go nuts. So the Predator gets the most recent version, 1.2, because that's the most recent version. But you could always go in 1.1 and 1.0 and do some modifications there. Okay. Now the Alien suddenly decides that he also wants to work on the same level. So there we go. He's also asking for permission from the server and saying, listen, dude, I need access to this level. However, so the server's going to tell him, listen, man, that's not how it works. The Predator already has access to it, and only one person can work on the same file at the same time. So he's going to deny this, right? So he's going to basically have to wait. The Alien's going to have to wait for the Predator to finish with the file, and then he could download the most recent version and work on it himself. Now, you might say, well, there's not very different really from the previous statement, but it is, because this works for every file, right? Damage systems, assets. So if Darth Vader comes in, right, you give him some cash and he wants access to the server and he wants maybe to work on the damage system, you can only give him access to the damage system, right? You don't need to give him access to this whole story here. He doesn't need access to the level. He doesn't need access to anything, just the damage. So basically we're going to make it like this, right? Yellow. That's what he's getting. So this is restricted access to him, and your server administrator can actually protect your work against leaks and information leaks. Now, obviously, as a startup, you probably won't be having anything fancy for people to steal, but it's always nice to have the backup version, and it's always nice to know that you always, you can work with this stuff, because in the future, it's always better to have an idea and understanding of how versioning works. Now, there's also another possibility. Let's say, in this very example, you want someone, someone comes in and he wants to work, on a separate. He just wants to work on his own thing. He doesn't care about all of this stuff. So there's two ways this can work. The first is he can branch out of it, or the second is he could actually fork out of it. And the difference is as follows. When someone branches, right? When someone branches, let's say, who are we going to get to come in? Let's say Kratos comes in, right? There's Kratos. Okay. There's Kratos, and he wants to come in and basically, I don't know, what kind of color should we use? Yeah, he's going to be orange. So there's Kratos, and he wants to basically work on the second level. However, you don't want to give him access to it. You don't really, you want to see what he does first before you actually continue. So here's how this is going to go. He's going to branch out of it, okay? He's going to branch out of it. He's going to have a copy of 1.2, which is the most recent version of the level. He's going to have a copy of it, and he's going to make some modifications to it. Now, you're going to be doing whatever you're going to be doing, right? So this is 1.2.1, okay? And you're going to keep going this way. And at some point, he's going to want to put this stuff back. Now, the cool thing about this is, in general, once this is branched, when you do something here, he can always just update it. Okay, he can always just update it. Well, this did not work the way I expect. But as you can imagine, branching is like a tree. Okay, whatever happens here is reflected here as well. You can make a change to 1.2. He's going to receive that change in 1.2. Whatever he's done here is going to stay the same. However, whatever changes you've made here will also be reflected here. Another option is forking. Now, this is just a branch, so we're going to make this. We're going to make the branching green, okay, because it has a connection to your original source file. Now, let's say not only Kratos, but someone else wanted to work on it. Who should we put in charge of this stuff? Let's say Spock. Just copy this. Let's say Spock wanted to work on the original version because he thinks that maybe he can do a better job than you could on this file. Now, you don't want to give him access to the first one. You don't really want to bother with the first version. Like, I mean, who cares about it? So what he's going to do, he's going to fork out of this. Now, when he forks out of this, he's literally making a copy of this and gets him in his own, gets him to him for himself. So now whatever he does here, he only has, this only reflects here. He can't actually merge back into this, into this tree branch here. Now, why is that needed? Well, this is generally better for... You probably wouldn't be using the fork list here. Even this Draw.io has a fork on GitHub. Basically, anyone can take a file here and do whatever they want with it, and you don't have to bother with clearance and any sort of people basically branching or merging into it and just having to diff against other people's code all the time. You just don't want to bother, so they just fork, and then he can have version 1. Like his own version of 1.1. Right? Maybe his own version of 1.2. Maybe he can have a server running with an older version or just his version. Maybe this is a mod. Right? This is out of your reach, okay? This is not your concern because he's not on your branches. This is your concern, however, because Kratos is someone that you actually do work with, okay? He's just, experimenting in 1.2. So whatever he does here, he could actually merge back into 1.2.1, and, you can have every upgrade that he is testing here experimentally to be actually on a stable branch. This is how patches are also made. In 1.2, you have your stable version, and then you branch off of it and you start experimenting, doing some crazy things, maybe break a couple of things. Once you have a stable version, you merge back into the regular one, and this is your new stable version. Another option is, of course, to have become the stable version and then branch again, right? And do the same thing all over again, but for 1.3. So this will be 1.3. Right, so this is your first stable version, then your second stable version. This is your third stable version, and then you're gonna keep going and keep going and keep going. And then if you break something in 1.4, you can always revert back to 1.3 or 1.2, or even like all the way up to 1.0. Or at some point, maybe Spock gets all the way. He's a smart guy, so maybe he gets all the way to version 2.6 for him. He's been going nuts, absolutely ham on this level, and suddenly he's actually ahead of you in terms of content. So what you can do then, you can like, let's say maybe he wants to give it to you and tell him, listen, man, look what I've done here. So you could always just make another branch of the level, and like this over here, right? This is another branch of the level, like this, assuming I don't screw it up. get away like this, right? So you got another branch of the level, and you can actually merge it in after that, right? But only with your authentication. It's kind of tricky, but listen, you won't need this. The point is that you have a lot of control from the server. But the point about the server is that it adds a layer of security and also adds the ability to work at the same time. Like, for example, in the damage system example, you could actually have different people working on it at the same time. And the difference would be that after you both commit it, okay, after you both check it in and say, listen, I'm done with everything, I want to put it back on the server, because two people will have two different versions of the file, you're going to have to merge them, right? And merging is basically done by differentiating against each, in terms of coding. So you're going to have a function about armor, okay, and you're going to have another function about armor, but this one would have, maybe if I stop just doing crazy things, armor penetration. So these are both the damage system, they both exist in the damage system, but the Predator did the armor bit and the Alien did the armor penetration bit. So how do you get all this stuff into the system? We have to differentiate against each other. So you're going to put the damage system, which is your initial file, right? And you're going to look at the armor, and you're going to also look at the armor penetration, and you look at the differences between each file. So you're going to have to see, well, listen, there's a bunch of code here that represents armor that's missing from the original. There's also a bunch of stuff here about armor penetration that's also missing from the original. So what we're going to do is make it into one file and then push it onto the server, okay? And this is going to be the new version of the file, and your server is going to be just fine. And one last thing now, before we continue on and show you how to set this up, there's also an issue where the server is going to be, because don't forget, this after all is a machine. This is a physical machine. So there's two options here. You can either have your local server, you can host it locally, right? Or you can host it on the internet. Just say cloud, oh, internet. Okay, internet. Now here, you're gonna have your cloud. This is this is an option for the internet. So in the first way, it's basically a virtual machine running on the cloud. Let's just call it VM, right? In the other, well, we don't really need this here, do we? Like, this is the first case. Second case, it's actually, I don't know. Personal? No. Let's say hosted, right? You're going to host this on your machine. However, there's a problem with this. And the problem is that if someone wants access to your server, right? Someone wants access to your server, your machine actually has to be turned on if it's hosted. So this has to be turned on at all times so that Alien or Predator can actually, do something with the server, because the server is going to be offline if this is offline. The same thing goes for locally, but then locally is obviously this is on your machine. There's just a folder with this stuff, and whenever you turn off your computer, you're obviously not working with it. And there's really very little difference between hosted things and local things, because in general it's only about access. If it's on your primary computer, all you have to do is just open a port, which I'll show you how to do later, and people can connect to it as long as your computer is active. And if you don't host it, you just, you don't have any internet permissions for this stuff, and only you have access, or anyone on your subnetwork, let's say the Wi-Fi network, will have access to it. You could also do this on an old laptop, for example, as long as it's dedicated only to the server, right? It's not a very expensive service to run. It's just that it requires a lot of space, depending on the size of your project. Especially since you'll be having all these versions, and once you get to higher numbers, the bigger the version numbers, the more stuff there is on the server to actually maintain. So you might need if a 50-year-old laptop probably won't do it, assuming there were laptops in 50 years ago, but let's say Windows 95 is not going to work with this. Okay, so this is your first option. Well, first option locally, second option hosted on the internet, which is on your computer, right? Third option is hosted on the internet, but on the cloud. Now, the cloud is a slightly finicky thing, because you have to actually create a virtual machine. You have to choose a cloud provider. I don't think there's many people out there that provide only hosting. In other words, they actually have a physical server out there, and they maintain it for you. So, the cloud, we're going to be talking about this later, how to set this up. But one last thing about local and hosted before we finish this video is that it all depends on your internet connection speed and bandwidth allocation. So if you have a fast connection speed, hosting your own server is not a big deal. You need a static IP, right? Something that doesn't change, so people always have your address. You can always connect to it. You don't have to, every time you restart your router or your computer, you're gonna have a new IP, so you have to send your IP to all your colleagues. Now this is a pain in the ass, obviously. Another thing you could do is maybe have a DNS, right? And then people just type in, I don't know, Death Star, which would be your project. So, all you got to do is just type in Death Star instead of the IP, and it's always going to be directing you to the right IP. But then you need some service to actually redirect that name to the correct IP. Usually no IP works well, but like this is beyond the scope of this video, and it's really like you'd be better off hosting it on the virtual machine, because you never know what might happen, right? I mean, your hard drive could fry. Maybe there could be a power outage, and all your data gets corrupted. So in general, you also might need to maintain your server. In other words, maintenance. You have to turn it down, maybe cool it off, etc., etc., etc. In other words, if you go to the cloud, there's people who actually do this all the time, right? That's their job. They have to maintain a bunch of servers, and in general, they have backups and redundancies there, and they have separate machines that could pick up the slack as this one's running slow. So really, your best option would be if you're working within a team, or in other words, if you need files to be accessed by multiple people across the globe, especially not just in your house. It's best to go with the cloud option. If it's only for you, if it's only for files that nobody else needs to actually access or modify. In other words, if you're making, let's say you're making 3D models and you've just created a car, right? You made a car. And only you are going to be working on that car. You don't want anyone else just being like, yeah, listen, dude, I don't think those wheels are fine. We need something else. Instead of you just them telling it to you, they're going to have to work on it. So you could always store your own personal work locally. In other words, all your binary files, in other words, all the assets, okay? 3D models like bows, weapons, Macs, characters, right? All this kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be on a VM, because only you are going to be working on it. Now, obviously, if someone else is going to be working on it, you want it to be available on the virtual machine. So you're going to have to send it on the virtual machine, and then people can both work, for example, on the weapons and be like, yeah, well, this weapon needs a longer barrel, or a bigger sight, or maybe a smaller sight, right? Things need to be adjusted. Obviously, within the engine we're going to use, this is actually integrated, so it's actually a lot easier to work with this than it looks like. So as you can see, it's quite a simple system, really. You got your forking, your branching, you have your access control management, you have your security layer, and then obviously you need to host this stuff somewhere. All right, I hope you understand how this works and what's the whole point behind this. It just seems like extra hassle that you don't really need this. A lot of people, I started, for example, thinking, what, fuck this, everybody else are idiots. I'm just going to manage my own stuff, autosaves, backups, archives, all that jazz, and it's going to be saving me a lot of trouble. However, I found out the hard way that you can get burnt pretty badly with this. You can lose hours and hours. You can lose thousands of hours of work here if you don't have anything version controlled and something happens like a disaster and your computer burns out. And I'm talking about not only your computer, but also the hard drive gets fried. And that's a real problem then, because you've lost all of your work. So please consider this. Obviously, you don't have to do this. You can always just work locally. You don't even need this, okay, just for some small projects. But it's good to get into the habit of using this stuff, because a lot of people in general in the industry use version control, be it on GitHub, I don't know, use Bitbucket, whatever, like SVN, Mercurial, whatever. We're going to be using Perforce. So that's what I'm going to be showing to you guys, how to set it up. All right, see you guys in the next video, and if you got some questions, maybe ask them in the comments, but I can't promise that I'll answer them, because I don't know how much time I'm gonna have. All right, that's it. Peace. I'm out.